Today I'll continue from where we left off last class, that is page 85. Now, we were talking about Malcolm, and we were talking about this particular episode, which kind of throws light into his childhood. We left off with the idea of Negroes and how they were misguided into believing that there were a certain section of Negroes who were, uh, popular or rich or powerful because of the kind of jobs that they had. For example, a few Negroes they believed themselves to be elite or big shots because they were either janitors or they were waiters at a place like the Lansing Country Club, or they even work as shoeshine boys at the state capitol. Now, these Negroes, of course, did not own much. They were not able to make much money, unlike Negroes who were involved in, the numbers racket, like the ones who would run gambling houses. So you find that these Negroes, most of them, other than the ones I just mentioned, uh, they were either living off the state income, that is welfare, or they basically starved. So now, WPA basically is some kind of an unemployment program which was started by the President Roosevelt. So you find that the Negroes, more or less, they were all living a terrible life. And you find that Malcolm is now talking about his own family, how they had become very poor and they were not able to, afford much in terms of food. And you find that there is a sort of a dissonance because Malcolm would talk about his father and how his father would preach about the pie in the sky, and all these kids would wonder about would be the next meal. Now you find, of course, Malcolm's family, they face a lot of challenges later on, from insult, from embarrassment, as well as starvation. But at this point, thanks to Malcolm's father, maybe because of his vision, you find that Malcolm's family, they fared better than all the other Negroes who were really starving at that point in time. Now, the reason why Malcolm's family was doing better was because uh, they were, growing their own food. They got collections from the father got collections from his preaching, and of course, he did other menial jobs as well. So you find that Malcolm's family was able to fare better than most Negro families. Earl Little was a very a charismatic preacher, and his preachings were quite, I would say, moving. And you find Malcolm, even as a young boy, realizes that it is his father's preaching which fed and clothed the entire family. But you find that Malcolm is extremely proud of his father. Uh, Even though he his militant campaigning and crusading would get him into trouble later on, because his father would try to spread the words of his hero Marcus Garvey. Now, Malcolm was also privy to certain conversations um, by an old woman who would call his father a tough man. So that particular phrase about his father stuck to him, and he would always think of his father as a tough man. So you find that he was very proud of his father. His father was almost like a hero to him. And then he goes on to talk about how his father preferred him or favored Malcolm, mainly because of the fact that he resembled. And Malcolm also cherishes memories of his father, how he would take just him with him to his, Gavi Unite meetings. And these meetings were held in different people's houses. And each time they would go for these meetings, there were many people, very few, maximum around or 20 would be there. And you find Malcolm realized that these people were behaving in a very strange manner. Because these are the same people who would, jump and shout in churches. But here they were very, sober, very quiet. They would listen very intensely to whatever the father had to say. Now, I'm at page 86, girls. So you find that Malcolm's father was not simply a preacher, but he was also an advocate for the freedom of blacks, the Negroes. Uh, and of course, he had certain phrases like, Africa for the Africans, Ethiopians away. And he always would, talk about the idea of Africa, which would be completely run by Negroes. So he would say, no one knows when the hour of Africa's redemption cometh. It is in the wind, it is coming. One day, like a storm, it will be here. And Malcolm says he remembers seeing photos of Marcus Garvey during these meetings. So his father would pass on these photos of his idol Marcus Garvey, and everyone would get an opportunity to look at this person who was trying to free uh, African Americans. Now, in the third paragraph, page 86, Malcolm continues his narration. He says, my father had a big envelope of them, and he always took to these meetings. The picture showed what seemed to be millions of Negroes thronged in parade behind Garvey, riding in a fine cart, a big black man dressed in a dazzling uniform with gold braid on it, and he was wearing a trilling hat, tall plumes. Plumes, of course, it means a feather of birds. I remember hearing that he had black followers not only in the United States, but all around the world. And I remember how the meeting always closed with my father saying several times, and the people chanting after him, up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will. I have never understood why, after hearing as much as I did of these kind of things, I somehow never thought then of the black people in Africa. My image of Africa at that time was of naked savages, cannibals, monkeys, and tigers, and steaming jungles. So here you find, whenever they would talk about, returning to their homeland, Africa, and using these words or phrases or, mantras like "Up, you mighty race," "You can accomplish what you will." Malcolm could never understand what they were referring to. Why would you go to Africa? Because according to Malcolm, his idea of Africa was something very different. For the little boy, Africa was a place that was filled with naked savages, cannibals, monkeys, tigers, and steaming jungles. So he did not understand the point of going to such a place, a backward place like Africa. Malcolm's hero, his father, Little, was a person who would drive in his touring car. Sometimes he would take Malcolm along with him to all the meeting places. So he remembers one daytime meeting. Usually the meetings were at night. Now this was in the town of Owosso. This is far away from Lansing. Now this place was called the White City. Now Negroes would call this place White City. Now Just as in East Lansing, you find that in this place, love on the streets after dark. Therefore, that is the main reason why they would have meetings in this particular place. It is in the daytime that they would hold meetings. And you find this discrimination in most of the towns. Uh, for example, in Michigan towns, you find most of the towns restricted Negroes. They were not allowed to move around after dark. So you find sometimes it would be just one family in the nearby county seat, Mason, which had a single Negro family called the Leons. Now, this particular family, Mr. Leons, had been a very famous, football star at Mason High School. So even though he had the ability, he was famous when he was in school. At present, you find he was working in the town, but he was only allowed to take on menial, low-paying jobs. So here, this paragraph is to kind of give you an idea as to how Negroes had to suffer under the white men, how they were not allowed to do anything that they wanted. They could not even get good jobs because of their color. Now you find Malcolm, he introduces us to his mother. You get an idea about his mother and his father, the kind of family dynamics, very interesting sort of family dynamics. So when he thinks about his mother, he says, my mother was always working. She was cooking, washing, ironing, cleaning, fussing over her 8 children. So when she was not talking to her husband, that is Malcolm's father, she would either be arguing. So you find that there was a lot of friction, and the main reason why they would argue was regarding food matters. That is the kind of things that they should be allowed to eat and not eat. Now, Malcolm's mother was completely against eating pork and rabbit. And this is something that her husband, a little, loved. Now, a little, that is Malcolm's father, he was a real Georgia Negro, meaning he was a big black man. And he was a person who loved to eat a lot. And Malcolm's mother was someone who you know, would beat up her children. And you find Malcolm developed a strategy even at a young age that he would find ways to get out of beating. That is, the mother was not really ashamed of beating the children. Uh, and when she feared, her neighbors uh, reprimanding her, or the fact that her neighbors were able to see her beating or hear her beating the children, she would stop beating. And Malcolm would make use of this. So each time Malcolm's mother raised her hand to beat Malcolm, Malcolm would shout, he would scream. And when everyone, would look on, the mother would be forced to stop beating. So she could not really beat Malcolm as much as she would have liked to. So she would just give him a few beatings and he would escape most of the time. So you have to understand that Malcolm was a very clever child. So here you find Malcolm's relationship with his mother was very different. And you find the reason why she used to beat Malcolm up was because he was fair skinned. He looked more like his mother rather than his father. So his mother preferred all his other siblings because they were darker. She did not like him because he was fair skinned. Was that just like his mother, hated him because he was fairer, you find that his father favored Malcolm for being lighter than the other children. And his mother, of course, hated him for the same reason. Now, Wilfred, who was the darkest, was his mother's angel. She used to love that boy more than all the others. So you find that Malcolm's mother did not really allow him to, get this, uh, grow up with a sense of color superiority because she would always thrash him. Now you find Malcolm, he learns he's a survivor and he learns at a very young age how to survive. He learned that by crying, he could, accomplish a lot of things. And then he talks about his older brother and sister, both of them, they had started going to school. And when they would come back tired after attending school, when they would ask for, biscuit, buttered biscuit or something, the mother would say no. But Malcolm, on the other hand, would cry out and make a lot of noise and he would fuss a lot. And you find that just to keep him quiet, his mother would give him whatever he asked for. So, in this way, he learned to survive. He learned to get things done his own unique way. Whereas Wilfred, of course, the others would stay hungry quite often. So, this is a very valuable lesson that Malcolm learns at a very young age, and that is if you want something done, you have to make a lot of noise. Uh, in page 88, we get an idea about the kind of life that they lived. You find that Malcolm's family, they owned a big garden, uh, and they also raised chickens. At times, the father would buy some baby chicks, and of course, the mother would raise them. And all these kids, they love chicken. Now, this is one dish that everyone liked. There is no argument when it came to chicken. Now, one particular incident that Malcolm remembers is, when he went and asked his mother, he usually does not approach his mother. So when he went and asked his mother for a little bit of space in that garden for, for gardening purpose, she allowed him. And Malcolm says he was very proud of that little portion. What he did is he would take care of his little patch of garden. He loved to grow peas, and he would feel very proud when the produce were kept on the dining table. So he maintained very proudly, he used to maintain the garden. He would patrol the rows, and the moment he spotted worms or bugs, he would kill them and he would bury them. And rest of the time, of course, he would not go to school. He would just lie down between the rows of the garden and he would just look up at the, sky. He would watch the clouds moving and then he would, think about things. Now, at the age of 5, Malcolm too was forced to go to school and he had to accompany his siblings, that is Wilfred, Hilda, and Filbert. Now, the school's name was Pleasant Grove School. So, this school was from kindergarten to the 8th standard, 8th grade. And it was actually outside the city, just 2 miles outside the city limit. And there was not much of a problem because they were the only Negroes in the area. And in those days, you find white people, they would adopt few Negroes. Negroes that were not, that would, Negroes who would not create much of problem. So such passive Negroes were usually adopted by whites. And of course, Malcolm says the white kids in school, they did not actually do anything to us. They did not insult us. They called us by our usual name. So he says they called us nigger, darky, and rastus. Rastus is a sort of a dark reddish brown shade. So all these terms were derogatory or discriminating or words that mean negative things, but they were used in such a way that these kids they began to believe it to be their natural name. So they or these Negroes they did not think of it as an insult, and the whites too did not think of it as an insult. So Malcolm says it is not an insult because that is what they thought of us. So now one afternoon, now this is in 1931, um, when Wilfred Filbert, Hilda, and Malcolm, when they came back, they got back. They actually witnessed a huge fight between their mother and their father. So this was something slightly alarming for the children. So there was a lot of tension at that point because you find there was a cult, the Black Legion group. They were threatening the father. Anyway, the main reason why this fight broke out between their parents was their father took one of the rabbits which they were growing, they were raising, and he ordered his wife to cook it. So now Malcolm says we used to raise rabbits and we used to sell them to white people. But father, of course, he loved eating. He loved eating rabbits, maybe because it's very tender. So father was like so angry that he was such a strong man. He actually pulled the rabbit's head away from its body. So he did not actually need a knife to behead chickens or rabbit. By simply twisting his big black hand, he was able to sever the head from the body. And what he did was he threw the bleeding necked rabbit onto the mother's feet. And that was enough to upset the mother. But the mother started crying. And of course, she started to skin the rabbits. Of course, she was not happy about it. But she began to, clean the rabbit to cook it. But the entire argument had angered the father, and of course, he was so angry that he slammed the front door and he started walking up the road towards the town. So he did not want to be there in the house and he just decided to leave. Now you find that Malcolm's mother was a sort of a strange sort of a woman because she was a person who had visions. Now you find that she had this very strange but very strong intuition. She kind of felt when things were about to go wrong. And Malcolm says that most of his siblings were also like that. When something was about to happen, they would all feel it. They can all sense when something bad was about to happen. And the same thing happened at the moment. Mother felt something was about to happen. And when the father, he was well up on his way down the road, you find mother, she ran screaming out of the coach. So she called him by his nickname, Early, Early. She screamed his name. So she clutched up her apron in one hand and then she ran down the yard. Now, Malcolm remembers this. He says, my father turned around. He saw her. And even though he was angry, he waved at her, but he kept going. Okay. And he just left. And you find that the mother was not very happy about this incident because she felt something bad was going to happen. Now, she later told Malcolm that, she had a vision of her husband's death, that is Malcolm's father's death. Now, you find all the rest of the afternoon she was crying. She was very nervous. Even though she had finished cooking, everything was ready, everything was set for lunch. You find the father had not returned. By night time, mother had completely become, she'd become hysterical. She was hugging her children, she was holding on to them, and she was crying. And the children were very confused because they have never seen her like that. And then the next day, when Malcolm woke up, he heard the sound of his mother screaming, and then that is when he sees the police outside, and they realize very soon that their father had died. Now this is page 90. My mother was taken by the police to the hospital and to a room where a sheet was over my father in a bed. And she wouldn't look. She was afraid to look. Probably it was wise that she didn't. My father's skull on one side was crushed in. I was told later. Negroes in Lansing have always whispered that he was attacked and then laid across some tracks for a streetcar to run over him. His body was cut almost in half. So you can understand the life life that overtook them. And you find that the father's death and the way in which he died was something quite unexpected, something unnatural, because he was literally sliced into half. His skull was crushed in one side, and most of the Negroes in Lansing, they were quite sure that he was murdered. And you find Malcolm's father, he lived for 2.5 hours in that condition. So you find he was a very strong man, and that must have been the reason why he survived a crushed skull and being, torn into two. Anyway, you find this is what happened to Malcolm's father. You have to understand he was the sole breadwinner of that family. So it was morning when the children at the house, they got word that the father was dead. And Malcolm says, I was 6 years. I was only 6 years old when this news was brought to us. And Malcolm says, it is a very strange, vague sort of an idea that he has about his father's funeral. He remembers the house being filled up with people. They were talking about the Black Legion, how the Black Legion had got the father. Of course, the mother was crying in one room, and mother had turned hysterical, and she was hysterical during the funeral. Now, Malcolm was only 6, so he says he does not really have a very clear idea or memory of the funeral. Uh, all he says he remembers is that the father's funeral was not in a church. You have to understand that he was a preacher. Despite being a preacher, he was not allowed into the church. And his was at a funeral house. And all Malcolm remembers during about the funeral service was that during the funeral service, a big black fly flew and came and landed on the father's face. And Wilfred, the oldest, he just jumped out of the chair and shooed the fly away. And when he came back, as he turned and he came back, Malcolm spotted tears streaming down his brother's face. And you find because he was too young to, react on such an occasion, and he says that when he saw his father lying, inside the casket, all he thought of was that his father's face had been dusted with flour. So there was a lot of makeup on his father's dead body. And Malcolm kind of wished that they had not put a lot of makeup on the father's face. So here you find it is a very strange sort of description about one's own father's death as well as funeral. But you have to understand that Malcolm was very young. He was just 6 years old when his father died. So all the events surrounding the father's uncanny, unnatural death, as well as the funeral, went over his head because he was too young to understand any of it. After the funeral, you find there were a lot of visitors who came. They wanted to pay condolence, and you find they were good friends of the family. Now, we're talking about a few particular families like the Leons from Mason, the Walkers, Maguires, Liscos, the Greens, the Randolphs, and the Turners. There were other people also from Lansing. So these were people who would usually, come together for Gavi meetings. So these were a few of, I would say, the constant visitors for a week who would visit the family. Now, Malcolm says, us, you know, they're talking about the children, and he says that we children adjusted more easily than our mother. We couldn't see as clearly as she did the trials that lay ahead. As the visitors tapered off, she became very concerned about collecting the two insurance policies that my father had been proud, always been proudly carrying. He always said that family should be protected in case of death. One policy apparently paid off without any problem, the smaller one. I don't know the amount of it. I would imagine it was not more than $1,000, maybe half of that. So the children, of course, adjusted to the death of the father. That's mainly because they did not know what was going to happen in future. The mother, of course, wanted to collect the two insurance policies, which the father was very proud of. The smaller one, they were able to get the insurance. They were able to claim the insurance. And Malcolm says, I don't know how much money we got, but all I know is that it was not sufficient. So it is with that money that mother paid for the funeral and the expenses. And then, of course, she began to the town and then she returned very upset. That is when they realized that the company which had taken on a bigger policy, that is more money, they were hesitating. They did not really want to pay them money. What they said was the father had committed suicide. And that probably was a clause which, stop them from giving them money or whatever. Anyway, uh, so the second amount, the larger amount, was something that they did not get. So then visitors, of course, began to come. They were talking about white people and how it was not suicide, it could never be suicide, and how it was murder. So after a while, visitors, of course, stopped coming all together. And so there we were. My mother was 34 years old now, with no husband, no provider, no protector to take care of her 8 children. But some kind of family routine got going again. And as long as the first insurance money lasted, we did all right. So you find there was a sudden sort of a routine that emerged out of this chaos. Mother was very young, she's just 34 years old, and suddenly she had to take care of her family all by herself. Wilfred, who was the oldest, he became, mature. He matured overnight. He began to act very mature. He quit school without telling anyone. He went to the town and he started working. Any job he would get, he would do it. And he would come back home very tired in the evening and he would give whatever he got to the mother. Now, the oldest sibling was Hilda. I mean, after Wilfred, it was Hilda. Now, Hilda began attending to the babies, and Malcolm proudly says, Filbert and I did not contribute anything. After all, they like 6 years old, and Filbert was younger, so they could not do anything for the family. So I did not contribute anything, he says. What did they do? Filbert and I, we were always fighting in in the school. Of course, they would team up and they would fight against white children. At home, they would fight against each other. Anyway, later on, the younger child, Reginald, came under Malcolm's wing. So you find Reginald and Malcolm became very close, and Reginald started looking on to Malcolm as a sort of a hero. So they became very close. And it was at this point that their mother began to buy on credit. Now, this is something that the father was completely against. If you buy on credit, that is your first way or first step into debt. Now, this is what the father believed. But mother had no other way but to, start buying things on credit because there was no money for them. Now, um, you find the mother started to go for work herself. She went to Lansing to find any kind of job that is, housework or sewing for white people. Now, because she did not look like a Negro, people did not think that she was a Negro. And people, a lot of white people, they did not actually want Negroes working in their house. And the mother would do very well working for a few days until they realized who she was, whose widow she was. Then she was fired. And then she would come home crying. And even though she, tried to hide it, she did not do a good job, because she really needed a job. And once, when Malcolm says, I cannot remember which, had to go for something to where she was working, the people saw us and realized she was actually a Negro. She was fired on the spot and she came home crying, this time not hiding it. So Malcolm's mother found it very difficult to get any kind of a job. Initially, people would take her on as a housemaid, but the moment they realized that she was a Negro, she was let go. She was fired, and on one occasion, she was fired the moment they realized that she was a Negro. So it is very difficult for her to manage her 8 children. Now, it is at this point that the welfare people, that is when they started visiting the house. Now, when the state welfare people began coming to our house, we would, come from school sometimes and we would find them talking to the mother, asking a lot of questions. And, they acted very strange, as if they owned the house or something like that. Anyway, they looked at us in a very judgmental way. And soon after that, she began to receive welfare checks from them. So she received 2 checks. One was a welfare check and one was a widow's pension. So Malcolm says that these 2 checks, one from the welfare and one from the widow's pension, did help a little bit at least. But it was not enough to take care of a family of 8. So then, after a while, their condition began to grow worse. And you find that it was very difficult for the mother to take care of all her 8 children, despite the 2 checks that she would receive on a monthly basis. You find the mother began to, of course, she had started buying on credit. Now, when they started asking for money back, she began to speak harshly to the man at the grocery store for padding the bill. She started talking sharply to the people, the state welfare people. But nevertheless, you find the welfare, the monthly welfare check was something that would come without any problem. And maybe it is because of the fact that they were paying them, the welfare people, they started acting as if they owned Malcolm's entire family. They started behaving as if Malcolm's family was some kind of property that they owned. So you find that there was this huge financial crisis that this family started facing after the death of their father. Things started going from bad to worse. You find that the state people, they were ready to give them whatever they needed in terms of food. That is, they were ready to give them packages of meat, potato, fruit, whatever they wanted. But Malcolm's mother, she refused all of them. Now, as children, they did not understand why their mother was, hesitating, why she was not ready to accept charity. They did not realize that the only thing that their mother had was her pride, and she was not ready to, uh, you know, give that away as well. So now by 1934, Malcolm says that they really started suffering a lot. So you find this is the worst depression year, and there was never enough for them to eat, to live on. And it was at this point that old family friends, they would of course visit them, and in the beginning they would bring food. And since it was the friends who were bringing them food, the mother would accept it. Wilfred, of course, was working a lot, and mother was also working. Whenever she could get work, get job, she would work. And it was at this time that we discovered that there was this bakery in Lansing, where if you were to give a nickel, then they would give away a huge tall flour sack of day-old bread and cookies. So it was old bread and cookies. Nevertheless, these children were very happy with that, and they would bring back this old bread and cookies. Now, they say, according to Malcolm, his mother was very good at cooking and she was very resourceful. So she would make a lot of different things with the same old bread, and, she would make stewed tomatoes with bread, and sometimes French toast if there was egg. Sometimes she would make bread pudding with raisins. Now, if we got some hamburger, then it came to the table more as bread than meat. So you find that whatever these children got, they would eat. And sometimes, when they did not even have a nickel to spare, they would be like so hungry that they would go dizzy. And it was at this point that the mother resorted to even more resourceful tricks. That is, she would take dandelion greens. Dandelion greens, it's just grass. Okay, so she would take dandelion greens and she would cook it for them. And Malcolm remembers how, the secret of theirs got out, and how children started making fun of Malcolm's family for eating grass, fried grass. So Malcolm says that some days we would have that. Some days, if we were very lucky, we would get oatmeal and cornmeal mush 3 times a day. So you find that their life had become really unbearable. Now Filbert and Malcolm, they were growing up, and they'd grown up to an extent that they stopped fighting. And if you remember, their father had owned a .22 caliber rifle. So Philbert and Malcolm, they would take this rifle and they began to shoot rabbits, and they would of course sell this to white folks. And of course, the white neighbors, they of course bought these rabbits, not because they really wanted to eat rabbits, but that is the only way they thought they could help these boys. And of course, sometimes Malcolm says Filbert and I would take the little brother Reginald also with them. Reginald was not like Malcolm and Filbert; he was not very strong, but he really loved to be taken along with them. And they would, of course, trap muskrats and bullfrogs with their rifle. They would wait in the little creek at the back of the house so that they could trap these muskrats. And if at all they would get bullfrogs, they would kill it, they would catch it, they would kill it, and they would cut off their legs and sell them for a nickel a pair to people who live close down to them. So these are bullfrogs and muskrats that these boys used to hunt. And of course, Malcolm says that the white people were not really worried about what they would eat. They would eat anything. In around 1934, something really tragic began. That is, there was a sort of a psychological deterioration within our family. So you find in the school, people started talking about relief workers, relief, and everyone would point at their family. So they started feeling inferior, and the so-called pride that they had slowly began to erode. Now, in the house, everything was stamped not to be sold. Now, this is the kind of food that the welfare people, started giving. So all the welfare food that they had or came with a stamp, which did not allow these kids to sell it. Now, sometimes Malcolm says, sometimes instead of going home from school, he would walk 2 miles into the Lansing. He would, move from one store to the other. He would look at all the things that were displayed or in boxes. That's like apples, which were displayed in boxes and barrels. And he would wait for a chance and he would steal. So anything was a treat to Malcolm. Anything that he could get, he would steal and he would bring. If that was not possible, what he would do is he would wait for dinner time and he would go to some family that they were acquainted with. And of course, they also knew why this boy was visiting their house at this particular time, and they would invite Malcolm to have dinner with them. And of course, he would eat to his fill. And it is at this time that he began, dropping in and visiting the Gohannes's home. That Gohannes's, it was a family that were living, and they were very nice people. They were good church-going people, and he began visiting them hoping that they would feed him. Johannes they were, of course, lovely people. They were very religious. They were people who attended the father's, preaching, and of course, they were church-going people. And with them, there was this nephew whom everybody referred to as Big Boy. Of course, he got the name Big Boy because he was a large boy. And Malcolm got on very well with this big boy, that is Johannes's nephew. Now, also, there was one lady called old Mrs. Adcock. She was also living with them. So she too would go with them to the church, and she was always trying to help someone. Whenever she heard somebody was sick, she would try, she would try her best to help them. So she was one person that Malcolm remembers because she gave him an advice. She told him this is something that she commented on. She said, "Malcolm, there is one thing that I like about you. You are not good, and you don't pretend to be good. You don't hide it. You are not a hypocrite." So the more Malcolm, he began to stay away from the house and visit people and steal from the store, you find that Malcolm's very nature became different. He became more aggressive. He, he turned into a person who did not really want to wait for anything. He wanted instant gratification. He wanted uh, everything in an instant. He could not wait for anything. And you find that he started growing up more or less physically than mentally. And he became, someone people began to recognize. And you find that white people started behaving in a very peculiar manner towards him. And that, of course, was because of Malcolm's father. And you find that, of course, there were comments that were passed in school that the Black Legion or the Ku Klux Klan had killed Malcolm's father, and that they were cheated out of their money by the insurance company. So there were a lot of rumors and gossip about Malcolm's family that he, of course, heard. And anyway, this is at this point that you find Malcolm was caught for stealing. And when Malcolm was caught for stealing, that again gave the welfare people a very good opportunity to, focus on Malcolm, and they began to come to the house. So they started coming to the house, and they started, talking of, separating Malcolm from his family because he had, gone over. Um, he had started developing strange behaviors. He started stealing. So this is not something good. So when Malcolm's mother realized that he was stealing, she started, beating him up. And of course, Malcolm would scream, and when he would wake the entire neighborhood, the mother's hating would stop. And Malcolm says that, Malcolm was very proud that he never raised his arm against his hand against his mother. Malcolm tells us about his youth and how he spent his teenage years, especially during summertime, how he would play pranks on people. So it was summertime, he says, and some of his friends, they would go out to the pastures and they would go cooning watermelons. So, cooning is basically playing a fool for a white audience. Now, white people always associated watermelons with Negroes, and they used to call Negroes coons. So, stealing watermelon became cooning them. So, this is what Malcolm and his friends did. They would go around stealing watermelons, uh, yeah, from the white people. So if the white boys stole watermelons, they would of course be compared to Negroes. If the Negroes were doing it, they were simply cooning watermelons. Now you find that the white people, they always justify their action. They were always blaming or making fun of the Negroes. Now, one Halloween, Malcolm remembers, uh, Malcolm and his friends, they were tipping over old county outhouses. Outhouses are basically toilets. And one farmer, I guess he had tipped over enough in his day. He had set a trap for the boys. So now what the farmer did was he knew that this is something that the boys would do. So what he did was he took the outhouse and he placed the outhouse in front of the hole. So when the boys started pushing the outhouse, what happened was one of the boys, he fell into the hole of the outhouse. So the hole was filled with the waste, toilet waste. And that boy began to smell really bad, and that was enough for Halloween. So this is something that they used to do. Of course, these are pranks or naughty things that boys would do. So this is a picture of an outhouse with a hole in it. It's just kind of an outdoor toilet system that they used to have back in the days. Now we talk about Malcolm's experiences. He tells about he learned a lot of things like picking strawberries. I picked strawberries, and though I can't recall what I got per crate for picking, I remember after working hard all one day, I wound up with about $1. So he got $1 and he wanted to convert that dollar into some change. And he happened upon an older white boy. His name was Richard Dixon. And Richard Dixon, of course, he introduced him to a game. So he said, if you want change, then you'll have to play a game with me. So, after playing the heads or tails game, the matching pennies or nickels, you find poor Malcolm, he ended up losing his money completely. So this is something that he learned. He learned that if you are always losing, and if you see one person always winning, then that person is not simply winning, he is cheating. So this is one lesson that he learns in a very hard manner. Now, it is during this time, you have to understand Malcolm is quite grown up at this point, and by this time, Malcolm's mother had started visiting the Seven-Day Adventists. Now, these were the Protestant Christians. So they had moved into a house far down the road from Malcolm's family, and these people, they would talk to her about their religion. They would leave, booklets, leaflets, and magazines, and she began to read them. And uh, Wilfred too started reading this particular leaflets, church leaflet. And very soon you find Malcolm's mother began to spend a lot of time with the Adventists, and they too, just like them, had dietary restrictions, and they were against eating rabbit and pork, which the mother too was against, because they followed the Mosaic dietary laws. That is, they could not eat anything that that came without a split hoof or that didn't chew a cud. So you find that we began to go, that is Malcolm and the siblings, they began to go with their mother to these Adventist meetings. The main reason why they would go for these meetings was because of the food they would get. And of course, they would listen to whatever they would talk, they would preach. And he says that 99% of people who had gathered were white people. So this is what the Mosaic dietary law means. So now during this time, you find the welfare people, they kept coming after their mother. And uh, at this point, you find the mother did not really hesitate um, showing them her true colors. She really hated them and she did not hesitate telling them as much. And she did not really want them in her house. But of course, since they were paying the checks, they were giving the checks, they exerted their right to come in and they began to, use a method of divide and rule. They would divide the children and they would plant the seeds of division in our minds. They would ask us questions like who was smarter than the other person, why one boy was different from the other boy. Um, Now, Malcolm assumes that it is with the intention of finding each child a foster home that they were asking these questions. Anyway, the mother was always, she was ready to fight and she fought them in whichever manner they could. Now, it was the mother that they targeted first. And how did they target her? It was through Malcolm, because Malcolm was the person who stole. And if a boy ends up having bad traits, like stealing, it's not a good thing to do. It's mainly the fault of the mother. In this way, they began to target the mother through Malcolm. They began to say that the children were not being